before we get into hospice, because it's a good place to start. It's often the place that hospice patients start is with palliative care. So hang on a sec, let me see if I can do this. Can you see it? Oh, cool, I can.
Yes, we can see it.
Cool. We're gonna skip that page. We're gonna go up from this. Oh, now I'm in trouble. See, Sharon?
Oh, you're doing good. There you are.
I want a different view though. I'm gonna go into my edit document view just because I realized afterward that I did not do a good job of setting up the second page. Here you go. And talk a little bit about palliative care and your palliative care team. Palliative care is different from hospice in that it can come at any time in your treatment. You don't have to be in the final stages of life. It's there basically to improve your quality of life. So the question when you're looking at who you need on your palliative care team is going to be what and who do you need to improve your quality of life? The question becomes, doesn't my oncologist know and take care of that? Here's the scary stat. There are 322 new cancer diagnoses each year per oncologist in the United States, meaning that every year an oncologist, if they're going to share their load, would be taking on 322 new patients or one new patient a day plus, given the fact that, you know, you're primarily working 5 days a week. So you kind of have to take control and you have to ask for the things that you need. So the question with palliative care is what and who do you need to improve your quality of life? As your situation goes along and you have more specialists involved, it becomes even more important to put together a team to take care of it. Focus for palliative care is going to be on all aspects of daily living. Your treatment usually begins in the hospital or clinic setting after you've had a complication. For me, palliative care came in too late. I had a jaw transplant in 2010. My LMS primary was in my jaw, and they forgot to refer me, again, because they're busy people, forgot to refer me to a speech therapist. And so I had to teach myself to talk. Denise Gigante can assure you that is not really a hard thing. I was pretty determined I was going to speak again very quickly, and so I did. But when I finally saw a speech therapist about a year and a half later, I was informed that seldom happens that someone is able to learn to speak again without a speech therapist. No one told me, I didn't know. And so I just kind of blithely went along and learned. They used my leg bone to build my jaw. And I also had no physical therapy for the first 2 years. And so I learned, sadly in that case, I learned a whole lot of really bad habits and lost a lot of ability in that leg. So it's really important that you know your body and that you know what you need to improve your quality of life. The list here that I have in front of you are some of the people who may end up on your palliative team. That would be your oncologist, sarcoma specialist, other specialty MDs, if you've got a pulmonary doc that you're seeing for lung mets, for instance. That would include nurses, social worker, and that would be Denise's role at the hospital to refer her out. She would be a part of the palliative team when you're leaving the hospital, for instance. Physical therapists, occupational therapists, pulmonary therapists. In the case where you can't sleep, that's something you may need to improve your quality of life. Ask for that person. Don't suffer. You know, I got so weary of doctoring that I put up with a whole lot of stuff that I didn't need to. And in retrospect, this is what I would do differently. I would be looking for those palliative people right off the bat Pain management is very much a part of palliative care. Psychiatrists, psychologists, or a mental health therapist to deal with any emotional issues that you have. It may include a chaplain, a dietitian, home health aides if you go home and you're home alone and need someone to come in. And then the last one is for your family, and that would be respite caregivers who can come in if you need someone with you to watch you so that your family gets a break. Anything anyone wants to add or ask about this slide?
What I would interject is I was an inpatient case manager that we didn't do PAL care, but yet we had a complete PAL care team at the hospital that was led by a medical director for the palliative care. Mm-hmm. They're amazing. They work with patients who have life-threatening diseases. Doesn't have to be cancer, can be chronic lung disease, can be whatever, heart disease. And they're specially trained. A lot of the things, as Vicky alluded to or said, you and your family are drained. You don't have the energy to try to figure it out. So you need somebody to advocate for you, and that would be that PAL care team. Now, having said that, having been on the other side of it with my mother-in-law, what she really wanted to do, we noticed she was failing, having some mental gaps. We didn't know she had cancer. She was down in Florida, and her diagnosis down there was H. pylori. She comes up here, sees a doctor in our clinic system, and she had pancreatic cancer. Oh. And so we were in the process of checking out assisted livings for her up here because we knew she was doing some funky things like going to the door and answering the door in a bra to the neighbors. And so we knew her time living independently was limited. And so we brought her up here. Her biggest dream that we could not fulfill for her was to go back to Florida and die in Florida. We couldn't do that because we had already packed up her house and it was up on the market. She wanted to go back to her old home, but I think that's where the gap can sometimes be in PAL care, hospice care, and that's where a good hospice nurse does it right, is they figure out what's realistic for the patient's goals and what isn't. But they help you meet your goals. PAL care, as Vicky said, is there for you when you are ill, not when you've been given that 6-month mark that many people outlive. So it could be when you've gotten the stage 4 diagnosis and you need supportive team, and just like hospice, you can sign in and out. They get your pain medications in gear, they get your family and you coordinating, they can get the therapies done, all of those things done on an outpatient basis. Like Vicky said, she needed, but she didn't have the energy to ask for. Is that kind of summarizing what you're saying, Vic? You're muted, hon. No.
I think it's great. Yeah, thank you. That was a really good
I have
backup question.
Yes, I have one question. What doctors or what therapist is a sleep therapist? Because my daughter has problems, really severe problems sleeping. So what kind of person would that be to see?
There actually is, within most hospitals they have, or clinics, they have sleep therapists that her oncologist should be able to refer her to a sleep therapist. And what they'll do is do some tests to see what is causing her, try to see if there's a physical reason why she can't sleep. And then if they don't find that, then they likely would look at pain management or the mental health areas to see if it has to do with either one of those.
And they might do that concurrently. They might do the mental health sleep therapist to help her learn some tools to help her sleep at the same time that they're testing her.
Okay.
Any other questions?
My psychologist also specializes in speech therapy. I mean, not speech therapy, sleep therapy.
Okay, thank you.
And also, I was going to mention that if you have time to get to know the different services your hospital offers, for example, in my area, hospitals offer things like art therapy, music therapy, pet therapy, where they bring dogs by, and also integrative things like maybe guided imagery. So before my last surgery, I had a list of things that I wanted, and I wanted the doctor to order them, because otherwise there can be this delay in when you get these things.
Thank you, Susie. Anyone else? Otherwise, we're going to just chug along here. I have another screen to show you, I hope. We'll see. You think I can get to it right now? It keeps wanting me to, hang on a sec. Let me try it this way. Can you see that?
Nope.
Okay, there it is. Got it. I'll get this, you guys. Thanks for your patience. This is just a quick rundown. This comes from a organization that provides both palliative care as well as hospice care. Palliative care and hospice, both are comfort care. The object of both is to reduce stress and offer symptom relief related to a serious illness. And both are addressing both the physical and the psychosocial relief. So looking at not just your physical issues, but also your mental status and your ability to function from day to day. Palliative care is those who are seeking curative treatment concurrently, meaning that they are treating your cancer as well as treating the side effects, the symptoms, whatever is going on with you for daily living. Hospice is for those with a prognosis of 6 months. Denise, you said 6 months, right, too? 6 months or less, who are not seeking curative treatment and are no longer responding to treatment. Palliative care can begin at the discretion of the physician at any time, at any stage, with a serious illness, right through to the end stage. You can be under palliative care and hospice at the same time. In fact, if you're in hospice, you also are receiving palliative care. It's supportive care with or without cure. It's paid for by insurance or self-pay, and you'll need to check with your insurance plan for coverage. It is covered under Medicare parts. Denise, parts?
I don't, for saying it typically takes place in a hospital. No, the Pal Care usually can work in tandem.
Yeah.
So it can happen in the community.
Yeah, yeah. And in that case, it would come under your Medicare supplemental.
Yep.
And then hospice care, you have to have 2 physicians certify that the patient has 6 months to live or less at the course that the disease is on. It's comfort care without curative intent, meaning that you're not being treated for your cancer at that point. All expenses related are covered by Medicare, Medicaid, and most private insurance. Again, it's going to come under hospice. Comes under hospital, Denise?
It comes under your hospice benefit per se. And what happens is when you go on hospice, typically you will sign, for instance, if I went on hospice, what would happen is that I would sign over all my benefits to hospice and they managed my care.
Yep. Oh.
So that covers inpatient and outpatient.
And then the last piece is really important. It's delivered wherever you call home. So you do not need to be in the hospital setting. You do not need to be in a nursing home. It's available to you within your own home, within a family member's home, wherever it is that you call home, and wherever it is that you would like to live that's going to give you the best quality of life at the end of life. Any questions?
But that's hospice care only, so room and board is not covered under hospice.
Right.
So if you're living in an assisted living, if you're living in a hospice facility, that's room and board. That's not covered.
I would also like to add that it is comfort care without curative intent. However, some people go into hospice, granted they have to, their disease progression has to be on the trajectory where they would qualify, 6 months. But according to our hospice caregivers, a lot of people seek hospice for a respite from treatment, and they can and often do revoke hospice and then go back into treatment. So it can be used as a vacation from chemo, especially if you're stage 4. You know, during these COVID times, it's just harder to get in and out of the hospital and dealing with all that stuff. If you want care to come to you, hospice is a really, really good option.
And under COVID, I'm sure that some of the rules I knew have changed on everything.
Mm-hmm. And hospice people do come wearing PPE, and you know, they have to be very, very careful because they can't be spreading germs from one patient to another, but they do follow very strict protocols. And so we never felt unsafe having somebody come into our home.
Melissa, did insurance pay for respite care when you needed a break?
You know, I only had one situation where I called someone in to care for John, and I didn't even try to run it through insurance. It was to go to my mom's celebration of life, and he needed to have a nurse at home. And he said, "Why are you getting me a babysitter?" I'm like, "Honey, it's not a babysitter, it's a nurse." And our daughter had stayed home with him too, but she's 19, and if something were to happen that he really needed medical assistance, I did not want to put that on her. But I'm not quite sure if they would have covered that for us or not. I never explored that.
I'm going to do a quick check. I think they do, but it's a limited time, a limited number of days.
And I did look into having a volunteer come, a hospice volunteer, and that's in a lot of cases what, you know, you have resources like you had the whole list of people that are on that palliative care team. There's a whole list of people that are on the hospice care team, including volunteers and people to help with just the elements of daily living. For my mom, it included dressing, it included, you know, getting ready for the day, and even getting ready, you know, well, we actually hired an independent person, help her get ready at night. But during COVID, they were somewhat restricted. At the height of COVID, they were somewhat restricted in what they would allow volunteers to do, but I think they're opening that up a little bit right now.
They are. My mom was in a care facility and passed away, but I was just visiting there the other day, and they were opening the hospice care to more than just basic cares, which is kind of where they were at in the facility. at the time that she passed. So they're beginning that process of.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So this sounds like it hasn't changed since I retired. Your hospice provider will arrange respite care for you. You can stay up to 5 days, and each time you get respite care, you can get respite care for more than once, but only on an occasional basis. And that's on the Medicare website.
Oh, so is that like going into a hospice facility for respite care?
Or a hospital. Yeah, either or.
Okay.
Actually, it's both. It can also be someone coming to your home and taking care of the person you're caring for, so that you could, Melissa, so that you could leave for a few days.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of hospice organizations have hospice volunteers. And the ones we had for my mother-in-law were godsends. I mean, she liked them better than us because she was mad at us for a few things. But she loved, and actually one was Pat Little. Vicky, you would remember Pat.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So she would, of course, vent to them. It was a safe place. She no longer lived with all of her close friends. And my mother-in-law was 87. For her close friends, they were 94. So, you know, they were definitely not caregivers. So, so yes, a hospice volunteer can give you a couple hours away, go to the grocery store. In the real world, you used to be able to go to the movies, but yeah, it was wonderful.
This might be a good time to bring in something else, and that is the end-of-life doula. And this is something that I learned about that I didn't even know existed. I've heard of doulas when you bring new life into the world, but there are similar things, similar aspects of the process when you're getting ready to leave this world. And there is an organization called, and I remember this until just a second ago, but I have it on my phone because I just reached out to our end-of-life doula that we used with my mom and with John. And she's a part of an organization called IELMA, I want to say. I want to give this to you. It's called INELDA, INELDA.org. That's international. I'll tell you before I get it wrong. Are you looking it up? If I had a link, I could tell you exactly what it is, and I could put it on the screen.
International End-of-Life Doula Association.
And I can also post to the Leiomyo site and a AARP article that Kylan shared with me that talks about what these doulas can do for you. But in our case, the woman that registered us with Alive Hospice was also an end-of-life doula. Met her through my mom. She was her hospice nurse with the organization Guardian Hospice, which was a for-profit, but then she switched over to the nonprofit Alive Hospice. But she actually came back to help my mom through the last 2 weeks of her life, even though she was not employed by the hospice organization that we were using, to be a doula. And it's just as it would sound. It walks not only the patient through it, but the family through it, to even somewhat of a greater extent than the hospice nurse, because they're taking into account everything. When you were talking a little earlier about the planning part, they take into account the planning part and answering questions. She put everyone at ease. We had a situation that came up the night before my husband passed at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he had a colostomy. And for some reason, that wafer came detached or whatever, and there was leakage, and it was a mess. I was not going to have my children deal with that, but I was also not going to leave my husband in that, and I needed help changing the sheets and changing him, and I called her at 3 o'clock in the morning, and she came to my home, and she honestly, she said, anytime you need, 3 o'clock in the morning, you call me, And, you know, so they're available for a very highly personalized level of care and hand-holding, even more than the nursing.
Vicky, I just sent you the link on Messenger.
Thank you.
Good.
I want to shift gears for a second and kind of take us out of this and introduce you to a TED Talk that I found while I was looking for information for today's session. It is absolutely lovely. The man's name is B.J. Miller. He is an MD. And he actually, Sharon, maybe you can help me. He was the executive director of the Zen Hospice Project, I think it was, in San Francisco, which basically existed, still does in some other format, but existed to provide hospice to people on the street. His interest in hospice comes from his own near-death experience. So I'm going to turn that video on. Bear with us, it's 20 minutes long. But I got done watching this and I had a total new understanding of hospice care, what it means to be coming to end of life, and just how to really kind of, it brought me through some really great emotional things. Sharon?
I second it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great film. It's definitely worth watching.
So 20 minutes, we'll be back. That'll give us maybe 15, 20 minutes for just kind of general question and answer discussion. And I hope that this kind of jumpstarts discussion. When we get done with the video, I invite any of you who want to speak to do so. So here we go, hopefully.
She's having trouble getting the. Okay. Yeah.
So Vicky, we're not seeing anything, just in case you were wondering. You're muted.
We can't hear you, Vic.
Try hitting Alt-A.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, you guys.
I wonder if it could be posted through Messenger, the link you sent me.
Actually, we could put the link in the chat box too, if we need to.
Where is it? I can't get anything going here now, you guys. I
Not
have
working.
no control over the screen at all. Sharon, can you maybe pull it up from your end?
Okay, let me see.
See if you can do it, because I sent you that link, right?
Yeah, Yeah, but that's long gone.
I've got it.
You got it?
So where do I send it? What do I do with it?
Down on the bottom, can you see share screen?
I don't think she can. Let me make
yeah,
her
you can.
co-host.
Yep. I can see share screen. Now I got to find it.
I think I have
Okay.
to make her a co-host.
I think she can do it.
Oh, okay. If anybody,
well, let's see.
yeah, maybe anybody can share their screen, so.
Okay, let me see if I can find it from my Facebook thing. Give me a minute.
Okay, in the meantime, anybody got some good jokes?
Or any good juicy gossip.
Oh, yeah, that'll work too. And I always thought Saturday Night Live should be doing a skit on Zoom meetings, right? With everybody going, and everybody yelling, "You're muted."
I think they actually did. I think I saw them do one.
Yeah.
It was probably
People
2
can
months
mute
ago.
now.
Oh, maybe I can get it now, you guys. I've got it. I think I've got it.
Okay, we trust
Okay?
you.
Okay, here we go.
You might have it. You have
You're
it.
good. You got it.
Got it.
You got it. It's going to
Sorry,
do
we're
a
gonna have to
commercial.
watch the ad.
Although I don't hear the sound yet. Not hearing sound.
Hey guys, am I muted or not? No. Okay,
No.
sorry. I was going to tell a really good joke, but it's too late.
Can you hear sound?
Never too late.
No. I think you have to go into advanced screen share mode to click on video. That video?
You have it now?
We got it. Yay.
We all need a reason to wake up. For me, it just took 11,000 volts. I know you're too polite to ask, so I will tell you. One night, sophomore year of college, just back from Thanksgiving holiday, a few of my friends and I were horsing around. We decided to climb atop a parked commuter train. It's just sitting there with the wires that run overhead. Somehow that seemed like a great idea at the time. We'd certainly done stupider things. I scurried up the ladder on the back, and when I stood up, the electrical current entered my arm, blew down and out my feet, and that was that. Would you believe that watch still works? Takes a licking. My father wears it now in solidarity. That night began my formal relationship with death. My death. And it also began my long run as a patient. It's a good word. It means one who suffers. So I guess we're all patients. Now, the American healthcare system has more than its fair share of dysfunction. To match its brilliance, to be sure. I'm a physician now, a hospice and palliative medicine doc, so I've seen care from both sides. And believe me, most everyone who goes into healthcare really means well. I mean, truly. But we who work in it are also unwitting agents for a system that too often does not serve. Why? Well, there's actually a pretty easy answer to that question. And it explains a lot. Because healthcare was designed with diseases, not people, at its center. Which is to say, of course, it was badly designed. And nowhere are the effects of bad design more heartbreaking or the opportunity for good design more compelling than at the end of life, where things are so distilled and concentrated. There's no do-overs. My purpose today is to reach out across disciplines and invite design thinking into this big conversation. That is, to bring intention and creativity to the experience of dying. We have a monumental opportunity in front of us before a universal, one of the few universal issues as individuals as well as a civil society, to rethink and redesign how it is we die. So, let's begin at the end. For most people, the scariest thing about death isn't being dead, it's dying, suffering. It's a key distinction. And to get underneath this, it can be very helpful to tease out suffering which is necessary, as it is, from suffering we can change. The former is a natural, essential part of life, part of the deal. And to this we are called to make space, adjust, grow. It can be really good to realize forces larger than ourselves. They bring proportionality, like a cosmic right-sizing. After my limbs were gone, that loss, for example, became fact, fixed, necessarily part of my life. And I learned I could no more reject this fact than reject myself. Took me a while, but I'd learned it eventually. Now, another great thing about necessary suffering is that it is the very thing that unites caregiver and care receiver, human beings. This, we are finally realizing, is where healing happens. Yes, compassion. Literally, as we learned yesterday, suffering together. Now, on the systems side, on the other hand, so much of the suffering is unnecessary, invented, serves no good purpose. But the good news is, since this brand of suffering is made up, well, we can change it. How we die is indeed something we can affect. Now, making the system sensitive to this fundamental distinction between necessary and unnecessary suffering gives us our first of 3 design cues for the day. After all, our role as caregivers, as people who care, is to relieve suffering, not add to the pile. True to the tenets of palliative care, I function as something of a reflective advocate as much as a prescribing physician. Quick aside, palliative care, very important field, but poorly understood. While it includes, it is not limited to end-of-life care. It is not limited to hospice. It's simply about comfort and living well at any stage. Okay, so please know that you don't have to be dying anytime soon to benefit from palliative care. Now, let me introduce you to Frank. He sort of makes this point. I've been seeing Frank now for years. He's living with advancing prostate cancer on top of long-standing HIV. We work on his bone pain and his fatigue, but most of the time we spend thinking out loud together about his life, really about our lives. In this way, Frank grieves. In this way, he keeps up with his losses as they roll in, so that he's ready to take in the next moment. Loss is one thing, but regret quite another. So Frank has always been an adventurer. Looks like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting, and no fan of regret. So it wasn't surprising when he came into clinic one day saying he wanted to raft down the Colorado River. Was this a good idea? You know, with all the risks to his safety and his health, some would say no, many did, but he went for it while he still could. And it was a glorious, marvelous trip. Freezing water, blistering dry heat, scorpions, snakes, wildlife howling off the flaming walls of the Grand Canyon. All the glorious side of the world beyond our control. Now, Frank's decision, while maybe dramatic, is exactly the kind so many of us would make if we only had the support to figure out what is best for ourselves over time. So much of what we're talking about today is a shift in perspective. After my accident, when I went back to college, I changed my major to art history. studying visual art, I figured I'd learn something about how to see. A really potent lesson for a kid who couldn't change so much of what he was seeing. Perspective, that kind of alchemy we humans get to play with, turning anguish into a flower. Flash forward, now I work at an amazing place in San Francisco called the Zen Hospice Project, where we have a little ritual that helps with this shift in perspective. When one of our residents dies, the mortuary men come, and as we're wheeling the body out through the garden, heading for the gate, we pause. Anyone who wants. Fellow residents, family, nurses, volunteers, the hearse drivers too now. Share a story or a song or silence as we sprinkle the body with flower petals. It takes a few minutes. It's a sweet, simple parting image to usher in grief with warmth rather than repugnance. Contrast that with the typical experience in the hospital setting. Much like this, floodlit room lined with tubes and beeping machines and blinking lights that don't stop even when the patient's life has. Cleaning crew swoops in, the body's whisked away. It feels as though that person had never really existed. Well-intended, of course, in the name of sterility, but hospitals tend to assault our senses. And the most we might hope for within those walls is numbness. Anesthetic. Literally the opposite of aesthetic. I revere hospitals for what they can do. I am alive because of them. But we ask too much of our hospitals. They are places for acute trauma and treatable illness. They're no place to live and die. That's not what they were designed for. Now, mind you, I'm not giving up on the notion that our institutions can become more humane. Beauty can be found anywhere. I spent a few months in a burn unit at St. Barnabas Hospital in Livingston, New Jersey, where I got really great care at every turn, including good palliative care for my pain. And one night, it began to snow outside. I remember my nurses complaining about driving through it. And there was no window in my room, but it was great to just imagine it coming down all sticky. Next day, one of my nurses smuggled in a snowball for me. She brought it into the unit. I cannot tell you the rapture I felt holding it in my hand. And the coldness dripping onto my burning skin, the miracle of it all, the fascination as I watched it melt and turn into water. In that moment, just being any part of this planet in this universe mattered more to me than whether I lived or died. That little snowball packed all the inspiration I needed to both try to live and be okay if I did not. In a hospital, that's a stolen moment. In my work, over the years, I've known many people who were ready to go, ready to die. And not because they had found some final peace or transcendence, but because they were so repulsed by what their lives had become. In a word, cut off or ugly. There are already record numbers of us living with chronic and terminal illness and into ever older age. And we are nowhere near ready or prepared for this silver tsunami. We need an infrastructure dynamic enough to handle these seismic shifts in our population. Now is a time to create something new, something vital. I know we can because we have to. The alternative is just unacceptable. And the key ingredients are known: policy, education and training, systems, bricks and mortar. We have tons of input for designers of all stripes to work with. We know, for example, from research, what's most important to people who are closer to death: comfort, feeling unburdened, and unburdening to those they love. Existential peace and a sense of wonderment and spirituality. Over Zen Hospice's nearly 30 years, we've learned much more from our residents in subtle detail. Little things aren't so little. Take Jeanette. She finds it harder to breathe one day to the next due to ALS. Well, guess what? She wants to start smoking again. And French cigarettes, if you please. Not out of some self-destructive bent, but to feel her lungs filled while she has them. Priorities change. Or Kate. She just wants to know her dog Austin is lying at the foot of her bed, his cold muzzle against her dry skin. Instead of more chemotherapy coursing through her veins, she's done that. Sensuous aesthetic gratification, where in a moment, in an instant, we are rewarded for just being. So much of it comes down to loving our time by way of the senses, by way of the body, the very thing doing the living and the dying. Probably the most poignant room in a Zen Hospice guest house is our kitchen, which is a little strange when you realize that so many of our residents can eat very little, if anything at all, but we realize we are providing sustenance on several levels. Smell, the symbolic plane. Seriously, with all the heavy-duty stuff happening under our roof, one of the most tried and true interventions we know of is to bake cookies. As long as we have our senses, even just one, we have at least the possibility of accessing what makes us feel human, connected. Imagine the ripples of this notion for the millions of people living and dying with dementia. Primal sensorial delights that say the things we don't have words for, impulses that make us stay present, no need for a past or a future. So, if teasing unnecessary suffering out of the system was our first design cue, then tending to dignity by way of the senses, by way of the body, the aesthetic realm is design cue number 2. Now this gets us quickly to the third and final bit for today. Namely, we need to lift our sights, to set our sights on well-being. So that life can become, and health care can become about making life more wonderful rather than just less horrible. Beneficence. Here, this gets right at the distinction between a disease-centered and a patient or human-centered model of care. And here is where caring becomes a creative, generative, even playful act. Play may sound like a funny word here, but it's also one of our highest forms of adaptation. Consider every major compulsory effort it takes to be human. The need for food is birth cuisine. The need for shelter has given rise to architecture. The need for cover, fashion. And for being subjected to the clock, well, we invented music. So, since dying is a necessary part of life, what might we create with this fact? By play, I am in no way suggesting that we take a light approach to dying or that we mandate any particular way of dying. There are mountains of sorrow that cannot move, and one way or another, we will all kneel there. Rather, I am asking we make space, physical, psychic room, to allow life to play itself all the way out, so that rather than just getting out of the way, aging and dying can become a process of crescendo through to the end. We can't solve for death. I know some of you are working on this. Meanwhile, we can, we can design towards it. Now, parts of me died early on, and that's something we can all say one way or another. I got to redesign my life around this fact. And I tell you, it has been a liberation to realize you can always find a shock of beauty or meaning in what life you have left. Like that snowball lasting for a perfect moment, all the while melting away. If we love such moments ferociously, then maybe we can learn to live well, not in spite of death, but because of it. Let death be what takes us, not lack of imagination. Thank you.
Pretty amazing guy.
That was outstanding.
Hello. Go ahead, Debbie, were you speaking?
That was outstanding, and it gives you a perspective that I hadn't necessarily. It takes away fear.
Mm-hmm.
It's. I mean, I'm going to watch this again because there's so much in it to absorb and embrace. I felt as he's talking like, oh yes, yes, and you can feel fear sort of melt away. It was outstanding.
I can play off of that and tell you, Debbie, that that was the thing that we benefited from most with hospice was the resolution of the fear. And there comes a point where there's a crisis and everybody's going to be afraid because that's what kicks in. And to get, it's how you get through that crisis. You know, without hospice, you have a crisis, you go to the hospital. That's how my neighbor, whose husband passed a week after my husband, you know, he wanted to go to the hospital. They didn't have hospice lined up. And he passed in the hospital, packed in ice, you know, and that broke my heart. We had hospice lined up, and the way this man talked about their passing and the people that pass going through the garden and they put petals, you know, here, you know, we got the luxury of staying with my husband and not having him whisked away. We set up our bedroom that I'm sitting in now without any qualms or fears. This is a peaceful place for me because his passing was peaceful. And our caregiver, our end-of-life doula, and then 2 assistants put out candles and chairs around, and this became our visitation. And then we were able to have the funeral home. You didn't have to call a sheriff to report the death or whatever. Hospice handles that. The funeral home came in, and I had candles that happened to be left in my closet from a Christmas thing that never happened. And so we put candles in paper plates, and we had the transport vehicle come pull into the back at midnight, and we lined the way from our back door all the way down to the transport vehicle. We all stood with candles, and we did a silent recessional. And then we gathered together with our candles, and we said a final prayer, and we blew out the candles, and we just stood in that silent moment. And had we not had, well, we ended up having 3 celebrations of life for John, but had we not even had a single one, everything that was encompassed in that day would have been enough for me. there was such peace that he was here at home. It wasn't a clinical emergency. There weren't those lights going off and sirens or alarms, sounding. It was so filled with peace for him, and no pain. I told him, honey, you have been through such pain during the course of your cancer treatment. I'm going to tell you that this is going to be the easiest thing you have done. And I believe that I was not lying. And y'all know what you have gone through. And his story was on a compressed timeline, but the actual passing itself for him was probably the easiest thing he's done in a year. And for me, I have to say that a peaceful passing is probably the single best thing you can do to assure the successful grieving of those you leave behind. It's never, ever, ever easy. The grief process itself lasts, a long, long time. But the fact that I'm not grieving with regret of the way we spent his final weeks, and with the knowledge that he was not suffering through that portion, gave me a lot of peace. And the fact that we were all able to be gathered around, and the sensory stuff. His brother was cooking in the kitchen. His last meal was, as my daughter Paige said, this is the best food that has ever been cooked in this house. No offense, Mom. And I agreed. In 12 years, finer food has never been prepared in this house. But it was because it was prepared with such love and consumed with family around the bedroom. And the satisfaction that I could see in my husband's eyes as he saw all these people that were gathered around him, and he ate a full meal, and he had not had an appetite up to that point. He ate, but not enjoying it. He enjoyed that meal. And, it was such a strange intersection of joy and sorrow. But it was allowed because of hospice. We were able to experience both, and those precious times that we had. But then there was laughter too, because family was here. Different than I think what would have been in a hospital setting. Although I know people that have been able to gather around their loved one in a hospital setting. We knew in June 2020 that was not going to be possible. If John went into the hospital, it might have been just me. And it might have been just for the day. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks, 2 separate times, where I couldn't be there at all. And we just knew we were done with that. But hospice really, truly allows for the gathering of loved ones and that peace that just transcends everything. And truly, that was the gift. That was the gift.
Let me add
quite beautiful.
From the nursing perspective. Again, as I said early on, I worked inpatient. And at that point, that was kind of a hospice setting because we didn't have the high intensity nursing that was out there. I used to tell patients that, and I still believe this, Melissa, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I still believe that the first 5 to 10 minutes after a person passes is the body just looks at peace. That's the time that you realize that it was a good passing for them. Their body, they no longer look like they're struggling. In some of the natural parts of dying process, you'll see some struggling in the breathing, but they're not feeling the pain because they're on medications. But as soon as breathing and heart stop, you just see the whole body go, and they're at peace. There's no way to describe it beyond that.
And our hospice nurse came in, again, they tended to him and they prepared him and they put a blanket over him and they even washed his hair for us. And I mean, because he had had 3 weeks where he couldn't get out of bed and even use the shower. So they truly just cleaned him up, and it brought such reverence and dignity to that. But Kylan, our end-of-life doula, went back in and she says, I so regret that I didn't call you in. It was right before they put him on the gurney and wheeled him out. She said, Melissa, John had the biggest smile on his face. I've never seen this before. And she's like, I've witnessed so many deaths. And she went, and I saw her take one of the other assistants and show them a picture of John that I had on my wall. And she's like pointing to it. And then I realized it was like, that was his smile. And it wasn't just a reflex. It was peace in the passing. It was peace in the passing, which that again also left me with such peace that there wasn't struggle and pain in that moment. There was peace. And in the palliative care portion of hospice, they do give you a comfort care kit, and we were administering that. And there was lorazepam, which is an anti-anxiety medication that many are familiar with. It's also given to decrease secretions, and it's so that there's no choking. It's also given to, it potentiates the pain medication. So it gives the pain medications a boost too. So it's got multiple uses, but for him, I believe he couldn't conjure up a worry in those last days. He couldn't even conjure up a worry because that was on board, and that was really an important part. It didn't take him out of things. It didn't make him out of it. And the nurses also assured us that the pain medication wasn't taking him out of it. There was certainly a period of time in the last couple of days where his eyes were closed. He didn't seem responsive, but we assumed that he was listening to everything, and you could even tell when he was kind of with us. But that was the time that he was preparing for his passage, and that's also an equally important time when they have downtime during that time of preparation. But it's not that they're being overdosed with pain medication. The pain medication is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that's handling the pain and allowing them internally to do what they need to do. Interestingly enough, I think there's a lot of sorting that's going on. They're sorting through life and, just putting things into place where they need to be. And it's really, excuse me, really a miraculous process. I believe that sadly, we forfeit that process when we're in a more clinical setting because there's efforts made to extend life beyond where the body is capable of living and living well. Now, I should also say at this point that hospice care does not do anything to accelerate the dying process. There is nothing done to speed it up or withhold something from the patient that they need. And that's, I think, a common misconception is if I enroll in hospice, I'm going to die quicker. In fact, a lot of times the opposite is true because they can fine tune a lot of what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And we had medication delivered to our house every day if we needed to make a change. In fact, we had a doctor on board that was over John's care and discovered that 2 doctors at the hospital were prescribing John things that were not playing well together and was causing us some trouble. And they discovered it and they said, we need to eliminate one or both of these. And when we did, he actually saw some improvements. So the fine-tuning aspect is really important, and they're available for that.
Let me just interject a scenario in working with a family. There was an elderly woman who was in the hospital, and I was kind of the next step after the doctor broached palliative care with the family and hospice care. And I walked in and the son was reeling. So I just let him, we're sitting out in the lobby area. outside the rooms. And he's kind of reeling with trying to decide, because he said, we promised Mom we would do everything for her. And I said, so that means slamming on her chest? And he says, yes. And I said, she's 86 or 87, whatever she was. And we talked through some of those things and the effects of doing that, you know, bones breaking, that sort of thing. And I was just offering him what I knew medically. And he looked at me and said something I won't forget, and this has to be at least 10, 15 years ago. He looked at me and he said, so what you're telling me is I'm no longer doing something for Mom, but I'm doing something to Mom. And I said, yep, you got it. And he said, so there comes a point in her life where what I'm doing is not for her as I promised, but I'm actually doing something to her, and I never promised that. And I said, yes. And he turned around, went back in, talked to the doctor and said, where do I sign? You know, but it's as a family member or as a patient, it's a processing, and putting that on the table and trying to understand it and get it, you wrap your head around it. And that's where hospice Pal Care can do. Back to Vicky's, you know, initial comments.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. The only real experience I've had with hospice, back in 2012, one of the women in our support group in Maryland was in hospice, and she was in a hospice facility, and she was so heavily sedated, she couldn't keep her eyes open. And I knew that she was going to die soon, so I just said, I'll see you tomorrow. I love you, my friend. And she was moving her foot, and her family said that was the only thing that she could move to say goodbye to me. Do you think there's a difference between hospice facilities over-medicating and at-home hospice?
My opinion would be that you don't know what's going on with that person's physical being. At some point, the body starts shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't, so what they can, how they can express themselves may not be a product of the medication. It may just be a product of the dying.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah,
And
I
I
call
believe-
that disease progression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was recently in hospice, and she passed away in the middle of July. And I have regret because I did not call hospice early enough, but I wasn't there. I didn't see her from March until 10 days before she passed away. And as soon as I visited her, I knew immediately we needed to go to hospice.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got to her, she was not being medicated at all, that she was unable to lift her head. She was unable to speak. She cried constantly. And they said she had been doing that for several days, which is why they let me go see her, even though they were not supposed to. They wanted me to visit her, and I had to visit her 6 feet away outside wearing a mask. It was painful to see.
Mm-hmm.
And she should have had hospice long before then. But again, I saw a lot of the same kinds of things with her. I mean, she was not being medicated, but she could no longer hold her own head up. She could not speak. She could not communicate. Like I said, the only thing she could do was cry. And they brought hospice in a couple of days later. And again, I did not see her after that day. But I was assured, because I spoke back and forth with the hospice nurse, that she was comfortable, the crying had stopped. She quit, she had already quit living, and going in the hospice gave her the opportunity to quit fighting, because it relieved her of her pain and her anxiety. And she had someone who was there watching over her, as opposed to, she was in a small group home. There were only 4 residents, but there wasn't someone with her all the time. And hospice was able to give her company that I couldn't be. So, yeah, so that what you were seeing was likely her body shutting down, which is what I saw in my mom. Her body shut down.
Vicky, along with what you were saying, before my mom went into hospice, and she was in hospice for over a year, I talked to my husband's uncle's wife, and she's a hospice nurse, and she said, quite frankly, most people don't call in hospice soon enough, and then they don't get to take advantage of the full complement of the resources that we have available to fully prepare for the season. And they think it's just in the last few weeks of life or the last few days of life. And honestly, there's so much that can be done in the last few months of life that prepare the person and the family for passing. And then if the person doesn't pass, if they need to continue in hospice, they can be extended. They don't kick you out after 6 months. If you need to be there, they can make a case and you can stay there. Or if the person is clearly improved and are no longer, that's no longer imminent, death is no longer imminent, they will graduate them from hospice. But I think people are fearful that I'm enrolling in hospice, this must mean that death is right around the corner, and that doesn't necessarily have to be at all. And so I'm certainly glad with my mom that we had all of the assistance that was available, because she went into hospice about 4 months after my husband had come through a triple bypass procedure, and I needed to be available to him for that. This is even before his cancer diagnosis. So we had a lot of medical things going on all at once, and I'm the only person local for my mom that was family caregiver. So I leaned pretty heavily on hospice for her.
To that point.
Was she in a facility?
She was in an assisted living facility. It was not a skilled nursing facility. And so assisted living can do some things, but they were only a level 3 facility. So, they couldn't do everything for her that she truly needed. And so we really took advantage. And then even in the last couple of months, we hired a caregiver to be with her from say 7 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock in the evening to 7 o'clock in the morning. She came and helped her get ready for bed, spent the night with her. And it was a private caregiver, so we weren't spending $30 an hour through, an agency, which we did for a very short period of time. And you can figure out pretty quickly that comes to $5,000 a week, which I don't know, wasn't in my budget. But we had someone that we were able to rely on that has become also a close family friend, even still. And so sometimes you have to supplement in other ways. Hospice is not going to be there 24/7 for weeks on end. And that's also maybe a misconception too, that once you enter that process, that they're going to be by your side all the time. They're all about really educating the family to do what needs to be done, and then helping you to do it. And they will come in, I had to call extra help on weekends. Probably every weekend that John was in hospice, we ended up calling in somebody on the weekend, and then we got 2 visits from a nurse during the course of the week. And our end of life doula came in multiple times. But we were empowered to do what John needed through the final stages with the Comfort Care Kit, and they really educated us to be the caregivers that he needed us to be and that we wanted to be.
So is that why you decided to keep him home instead of putting him in a hospice facility?
Yeah, because again, also in June, we weren't sure what the visiting situation was going to be either. And I was not ready to,
Right.
you know, hand him off to somebody else. I needed to be with him.
Okay.
Question, what's a comfort care kit?
So a comfort care kit is a little box that they send from the pharmacy that contains morphine, liquid morphine. It contains lorazepam. It can contain, I think, Haldol. There's a few medications that are commonly used in the end stage. We didn't end up using the liquid morphine because for John, he was already on oxycodone, and we found that it was easier to crush his oxycodone, mix it in just the tiniest bit of water, and use that through like a small, I don't know if you call it syringe, you know, just at his gum line, and that was giving him the pain medication that he needed but we did use the lorazepam in the comfort care kit. But again, that was another thing for John. When we finally enrolled him in hospice, he confessed that he did it for me because he could tell that I was getting a little anxious about what do I do if something were to happen. I feel ill-equipped to handle this on my own. And he had already said, I do not want to go back into the hospital, honey. You know, it was too traumatic to be separated. And I was his advocate, and he would take less pain medication than he needed so that he could be awake and alert and aware, so that no medical mistakes would happen. And so he was trying to be his own advocate, which put him in a lot of pain and a lot of anxiety. And so we just had decided that the last trip to the hospital was the last trip to the hospital, you know, and he wasn't ready to admit that he was that as close to death as he was. They can pretty much read the signs and tell you. They can see some secondary symptoms, what they call temporal wasting, and they can take a look at the body and see where they are. And it was very funny when he asked, they told him, quite frankly, you've probably got about 2 weeks left. And he said, I respect your experience, but I think I want to talk to my doctor about that. Like he was going to get a second opinion. But, you know, they'll be as frank and as honest with you as you want them to be. They're not trying to sugarcoat anything, but they're also trying to, you know, equip you to handle really what's at hand. And that approach is really important for everybody that's involved. It is so important. It was so important for my kids. And I had to have a very hard conversation with them the week before he passed because he kind of prepared everybody for saying, you know, I'm just taking a break from chemo, but when I get strong enough and I can walk around, then I'll be able to go back into chemo. And I think that hope really did get him through. I didn't want to take that hope away from him. I was never about that. But there came a time where we all had to really come to terms with what was next. And that is a hard process for anyone. I don't care who it is. I don't care what your faith is. I don't care, you know, how much support you have. It's a hard process. There's some very hard conversations that happen, but that have to happen. And looking back, we had the luxury of having those conversations and having the people there that could answer the questions, that had seen this before, that knew what was going on, that could explain what was going on inside of John's body, the things that we couldn't see. Yeah, it's really important.
The other thing to be aware of, and I looked it up, it seems like it still happens. Hospice is paid per diem per day for your care while you're in hospice. That includes your medications, your nursing, your PT, whatever happens. Mm-hmm. Now, what they typically do is they may make money on some days that nobody goes out there like twice a week, but what they typically do is your last 72 hours of life, they will bring in a nurse. And the nurse stays 24/7, or at least it'll be shift. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the nice part about that, my brother-in-law is 85. He remembers caring for his father Now, I know different, you know different, but he remembers caring for his father and giving him the pain injections. And he said, I gave the injection that killed my father.
No.
Okay, which is a horrible thing to live with for 60 years. Okay. Now, when my mother-in-law was dying, she went into a coma 3 days before she died. And we fully believe that it was because she was to move that weekend from assisted living to the attached nursing home. Didn't want to go. Okay. But they couldn't handle her. So in the assisted living. So once she went into a coma, though, family and hospice nursing stayed and she never left her apartment. But what the nurse did each time she injected or gave her the injections the last night, she said, I don't know, this may be the last medication I give her. I do not want you to give it because I don't want you to feel like you did it or like whatever. And she said, what I want you to know is this is her comfort and this is to keep her breathing comfortable. And I worked long enough as a nurse to understand between the lines, but she was telling my husband that, who needed to hear that, you know? And so there will come a time when the pain medication may suppress respirations in the last days, but that patient is already at the point of their body giving up. So the medication isn't doing it, it's the body doing it. So that, you know, I want to be very clear on that for those that may have fears of that with family. Any medication you give them is purely for their comfort and purely to keep them comfortable in their last days, as he talked about, so that we aren't making end of life something you fear. End of life is something that is a process that's okay. And nobody wants to get there. Nobody wants to be at end of life. But when that happens, it's not a horrible thing to go through. We all want to live another 20 years, in my case. Vicky knows how old I am. But, you know, like the doctor that talked, I've been through so many things in my life that I shouldn't be here today, including cancer, seizure disorder, all of the resuscitated at birth. So I have lived long enough to know that life is a gift. And at some point, the package is going to close. And when that package closes, I want it to be comfortable.
It's about time for us to close. We're coming up on 2 hours, and I don't want us to keep you too much longer. Want to open 1-2 more questions, and then I've got just a little bit of closure to do, and we'll be out the door. Before we get there, I do want to mention to you that in the Facebook group, I will post. Melissa sent me the doula link. Denise sent me a link on something, and I've put the YouTube link here in the Zoom group chat, but I will also put that. I'll do a Facebook thing, Sharon, on maybe linking people to that YouTube if people are interested in that, if we can do that. Put that in the Facebook group so that you have access to it, and can also then, you'll have that address. So if you want to share this with family members who aren't here, you could copy that link and send it to people. So I wanted to let you know that we will give you those resources that we talked about here. Does anyone have a question they want to ask before we go that we maybe haven't addressed? I want to thank you all for hanging in there with us. It's been lovely. Melissa, Denise, you did such an amazing job. Thank you both for sharing your
Thank
heart.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Well,
then-
thank you for letting me step in.
And then
It's been
one
my
last,
pleasure.
yeah, it was good to have you here. One last thing, I wrote down a couple of pieces that I want us to take away from BJ Miller's talk.
Mm-hmm.
One is you have the opportunity to redesign your life now. And so knowing about palliative care and hospice is a really great step for you because you have the opportunity to redesign your life now and to redesign the life of those you're caring for if you are a caregiver. And the second thing is I love what he said, that hospice gives us the opportunity to crescendo our lives through to the end.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's my hope for all of you, is that you are able to do that, that you're able to live well in spite of your circumstances, and to make that, as Denise said, make every day, make that gift count to the last.
Well, y'all are courageous warriors. I'll tell you, that's why I stay with this group, is because I'm inspired daily by what I read about how you bring such courage and determination and just persistence to the battle, and how everyone is so open to learning from one another, and how everyone is so quick to help one another. It's just a really amazing group of people. And y'all, I mean, all of us are going to pass one day, but I would say that y'all have what it takes to, you've already done harder things. I promise you, you have already done much harder things. And with the help of hospice, it can be a lot easier, and I promise you it'll be easier for your loved ones that you're leaving behind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.